have a variety of grouping options that we can offer gifted students, and many of them have a strong research base for how we do that grouping. I think that the direction that the Catholic school system in Sydney is taking is probably the appropriate one, because you are looking at grouping as flexible. And I think that's one of the things that's been misunderstood in the grouping research to this point, that once children were in a group and identified or labeled as gifted, that they didn't move. They were okay from that point on, and everything that happened in those classes was just perfect for them. And that isn't really the case, I don't think. I think our best grouping is when we see flexible grouping in place. And what do I mean by flexible? We can group students by their ability, and we hope that that will happen for them every day in school for some portion of the day, right? We can group them by interest. So we might take students who have an interest in aeronautics, for example, and they may come from a variety of ability groups, but we put them together to do an interest-based project, project-based learning in that area. We could group them by learning preference. Do they prefer to read about something? Do they prefer to analyze films about something? Or do they prefer to make something in a makerspace? Those kinds of things. So grouping them by their learning preferences for part of the grouping that we do. And we can also group them by performance. So you can be grouped by ability because you have the potential, but not necessarily the achievement levels. And you can be grouped by performance, where you've got all of your high talent kids, the talented of the talentedness ones, and you do something that's very accelerated for them. So flexible grouping, I think, is the ideal, and again, that change up of the grouping, I think, is important. But we do want there to be a consistent period of time every day where they are grouped with others of like ability and or like performance, because that's where they're really going to learn from others more than other kinds of grouping. The other kinds of grouping are good because they learn to collaborate, they learn to work together, they learn to take follower roles rather than just leader roles, that kind of thing. So that's important. And in terms of the research on grouping, it looks to me at present, and this is through 2018, I still have a little bit more analysis to do, but it looks to me as if cluster grouping is really our strongest grouping model. And again, there are models out there now that allow us to think about cluster grouping for a whole school. And we would do it by putting ability groups together, but again, there could be flexibility within that cluster grouped classroom. But each teacher would differentiate appropriately for 3 or 4 different clusters of ability or performance in their classroom. So I think there's some real hope there. We have some good beginning foundational research in that area, and I think that may be the way we end up going. No longer do they necessarily need to be put in special schools. No longer do they still need to be in a homogeneous class where some of them may be good in maths and others may be good in reading or philosophy, but are kind of dragged along by the rest of the class because they're only in a single class rather than allowed to move out to the areas where they have strengths or weaknesses.